Hey guys, in this video, I'm gonna walk you through my entire finish process on this grad cap. We're gonna start back when we got done tooling it and had fresh leather to work with. I'm gonna show you each step and product along the way that I did, along with dry times, to let you know how we come up with this resisted antique finish with the dyed backgrounds in there. We're also gonna walk through and show you how I attach this to the cap. Talk about a couple different options there. So I hope you have fun with this project. If you didn't catch the video earlier in the series, we did walk through tooling this step by step as well. If you want that pattern and want to tool this up, be sure to check the link below for the Leather Life community, where you can jump in there, get this pattern along with other patterns for previous projects as well. So I appreciate you letting me be a part of your Leathercraft journey. Now let's jump back to where this started at. My first step in the finish process is going to be to dye the backgrounds, and I'm going to be using Phoebe's Black Pro Dye, but I find it easier to put it in these wide mouth jars, so that's where I have my dye at, is in that jar, easy to get to, without the risk of spilling that. I'm going to be using the fine tip detail brush for this. It's important when you get that dye on there to dab some of that off on the edge of your jar, because we don't want too much dye in that brush, because that dye is going to run when we put it down on the leather. So if I have too much dye on there, try this in one spot, hopefully I don't mess this up. You can see as I push that down, that dye is going to hit and run a little bit. I'm too nervous to put too much dye on there. But we're going to use that running to your advantage though, once you get the idea of how far that will run. And we want to make sure we're getting dye all the way up to the edges. So right in the bevel lines, we've cut and beveled that leather. Ideally with a nice clean bevel line is going to make it easier to do your clean dye work on here. We want to avoid that dye running up on the side of vines or on the side of your borders, anywhere that we're not wanting that dye to be. So I'll even turn a project a little bit, get this in where I can see right where that dye is landing at, making sure we're not getting it where we don't want it to be. We're going to do that for all of our background spaces. Using a little bit of that dye running to help us where we can. We'll continue to make our way around here. Now again, this is a little bit of a tedious process, but it's what's going to help make this really pop at the end, is making sure we have that nice clean dye work goes all the way up to those edges. If you hold back from your edge and don't quite get all the way into those bevel lines, it's going to show up in the end, right? It's not might not seem like a huge difference in one area, which I'm going to show you on this area and kind of do what I'm telling you not to do, so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. I need to get the center of that piece there. All right, now look how this is in next to those edges here. We're going to get up close and let you see that. See how that's held away from the edge of my line? It's not right clean and crisp like it is down here in these spots. When we get in these background spots, we're right in next to that edge, and that's what we want. We don't want to be held apart from it like we are up here. So nice and clean next to your edge versus that is going to really show up in the course of your whole pattern. We're going to make sure we get all the way down in there on all those edges. All right, after we go through and dye all of our background areas, we want to talk about our lettering next. So lettering in this case on this project is the numbers for that year. We're going to go ahead and dye that black as well. Again, with this small detailed brush, I think it's a great thing to take your time with. And this little brush allows you to get right down to that edge, just over our bevel lines now, because we're coming over the top. We've beveled these lines from this year, so the year is standing up, right? Those letters stand up, the back of this is pushed down. So we want to be able to come over that edge, a nice clean line, and get all the way down in there. Just like we talked about our backgrounds, not getting all the way into those bevel lines, causing that to not look super crisp. Same thing on here. If we do the number, but we have that held up on just the top of that and don't quite get down all the way over that bevel line, I want to show you the difference on this as well. And I want to show you what it's like to be a little choppy on that edge too. Okay, now up here I want to make sure almost had some drippage going on that brush. I got to be careful there. I'm going to take my time and get over the edge up here so I can show you the kind of the contrasting look of it. You can see I have this picked up even tipping to where I can get to that edge. But so let's look right here how clean and crisp this is where it's all the way over that edge. And then as we make our way down that too, we can see here where it's not quite on that edge. Fighting my focus on you a little bit here. But it's not quite over that edge, and it's going to show up across your whole pattern. The other thing is right down here where it's not an even line. You can see where we're a little bit choppy as that comes across there. Those are the little details that really matter when you're talking about your finish work on a project like this. So taking the time, let's get crisp, get all the way down into those bevel lines, and let's make this a nice clean look to this. See how that's cleaning up quite a bit there. Okay, there's lots of spots in leather work that are very forgiving. The dye portion of it is not so forgiving. So take your time, pay attention, make sure we're down in all the bevel lines and get a good clean dye job. When we get down at the end of the dye work, we'll come right back and show you the next step. Don't worry about dry time from the dye to the next step. Just get your dye work and then we'll roll right on into that next step there. But you need to pay attention to what you're doing with your dye work, and I need to pay attention to what I'm doing. So we're gonna get this dyed up, backgrounds and the letters there, and then we'll come back for the next step. So I got the dye work done, but before I do this next step, I need to back up. I usually do this right when I get done tooling, but I do want to put a stitch groove around this project. So especially if I was going to be dyeing this border, but even with the rest of the finish process, I like to put that groove in now. That way, any of our finish gets down in that groove and we don't have like a glowing white line when we get done with this. If I was to put all the finish on and then take that groove out of there, you'd have that raw leather exposed through the finish. So we're just going to get that groove cut in here. This not only gives you something to follow along while you're stitching, but it's going to give a spot for that stitch to lay down in as well. So we got that stitch groove. Now let's put the next product right on here. But again, this next product, we could come right straight after dye. You don't have to worry about how long that sits for. So the next product that I'm using is Phoebe's 100% pure neat's foot oil. This is gonna do two things. One, it's just gonna help rejuvenate that leather. It's been kind of dried out a bit through all the tanning process and then our tooling of wetting down and drying out and wetting down and drying out. And the other thing it's going to do is help this dye really get taken evenly throughout the leather. So with black, we don't notice it near as much, but any of our other lighter colors, this step really seems to help even that dye out. As the leather is kind of absorbing that oil and sucking that in there, it evens that dye as it does it too. So we'll put that on there. Now that's gonna sit and dry. You don't have to let it sit too long, but we do want that to have time to absorb into the leather a little bit. So you can see where it's dark and wet looking right now. We'll let that sit till that color starts coming back. General rule for a light coat like that, give it an hour. I mean, 30 minutes, you're probably good, but give it an hour, be safe. It's not gonna get too dry to go on to the next step, so don't worry about that. But let that sit and we'll come right back. Now that oil's had a chance to set in there, we're gonna come back with a product called Resilane. Now this product here is what we're gonna be using as a resist. Now what the heck does a resist mean? Well, a resist means that it's going to seal this leather and then resist or hold back the next product that we put down. So we're putting a resisted antique finish on this, and that means I don't want the antique, our next step, to actually soak down into all the leather. We're gonna want it just to come in as a highlight to a lot of the detail work that we've done. So that's why we're putting this on to seal this leather. And notice I'm working in circles, making sure I'm getting a generous coat on here, but we're even, we're covered everywhere. And the circles, that's gonna help avoid any streaking. This is an acrylic finish, so there's gonna be that acrylic coat on there. And I wanna make sure it's not getting bubbled or streaky anywhere. Just a nice light even coat. And you can see it's kind of built up a little bit down in some of the deep spots. That's okay. That's okay. If there's big bubbles on top, we kind of wipe those off, but you can see already everything's settling in there. So we'll let that sit and dry. This is one where you can use that rule of thumb of give yourself an hour on here. We want to make sure this is good and dry and set before we come back with that next step. Now that Resilane's had time to dry, it's set up really nice, so that's gonna resist when we put this antique down. Now it's hard to read through that messy bottle, but this is a medium brown antique finish from Phoebe's. I just use a piece of sheepskin to put that on. So we're gonna come in here and I'm gonna work in circles, make sure I get down in all the little cuts and crevices and bevel lines. That's the idea of this antique, is that it's going to pop and highlight all that little detail work that we've done. And you can see I'm moving pretty quick. I don't want to let this sit on here too long. The idea is that resist is going to keep it from soaking into the leather, but the longer something sits on that resist, the more it's going to want to eat through there. So I just work my way through here, working in circles, get all of that work down in all the details, and then I'm going to come back immediately and wipe this off. So I like using the inside of a sock, and the texture on that seems to grab that antique really good, and you can see that pulling that off of there, but it's left down in where all that small detail stuff is, in all the lines, all the cuts, all the cracks. Now as you're looking through, if you miss a spot and don't quite have it in all the way, then we can come back and add more in there. You know, if we missed a decorative cut, you can come add some in and then wipe that off again here. So right at the end of that, as soon as I've completed my antique, I'm not letting that sit and dry very long, just as long as it takes for me to put that antique away, take the glove off. Then I'm going to grab my Resin back out, and our Resin, we're going to come and put another generous coat on here. You can see there's no dry time in between this, but I put this coat on here. Now this is another one where I work pretty darn fast because this is an acrylic finish, like we said before, and so it will set up quick. And I come and wipe that off, and you see all that antique that pulled off of there. That's what I want to have happen. The point of this Resin, the second time that we put this on here, is to not seal over the top on the smooth stuff. We've already done that. What this is doing is it's helped us pull any excess antique off of there, and then it's mixed with the antique that's left down in those cracks, and that's what's going to seal and set up and hold that, so we don't have drying, cracking, flaking of any of that antique. And that's what's going to give you that long-term finish and keep that really nice look that you're after. So if it's looking milky and muddy down in those cracks right now, perfect. That's how you want it to be. Let that sit and dry, and then we'll be ready to work on our edges. Before we can get this attached to our cap, we need to make a hole so that our tassel can go through there. So we have it marked on the pattern, but in the middle there, you can get away with a smaller hole. I made this pattern to have a 1-inch hole just to make sure you have plenty of room there. So I'm using a 1-inch punch. If you don't have a 1-inch punch, you can always cut that out by hand as well. We'll set this in here. Now we got that nice clean punch. That's going to be fit over there really nice and allow that tassel to come through there. Now also, before we go sticking this down on here, our edge, we're not going to be able to get to that once this is stitched down here. So we want to finish this edge and dye that black, slick it up before we go sticking this down. So let's do that now. Step one to getting these edges finished out is going to be using an edger on the top of this here. I'm going to come right along where that takes that edge off of that. Just goes from that square edge to a little bit of a rounded edge on top. Now, a lot of projects will do both top and bottom on there. However, this one is going to be going straight down onto that cap and sitting flat with a little bit of that cap revealing out on the edge here, so I don't need to edge the bottom side of this. But what I do want to do is get it nice and slick, so I'm going to come by with some fine grit sandpaper, and we'll just get that slicked off there, start sanding that down. Now that leather, it's got grain just like wood has a grain to it, so you'll notice it'll be harder to go one way than the other. If you go with the grain of that, you'll smooth it down a whole lot faster than if you're fighting that grain. All right, so we'll go around and get all these sides nice and smooth. And I like to do that before we add any dye to there. There's no sense in dyeing that edge and then coming back and having to sand it off. Okay, now that's nice and smooth around there. Next step is going to be to dye this edge. We're going to dye that black, ties in with the backgrounds as well as the edge of that cap. So I have my Phoebeans Black Pro dye stuck in one of these edge markers here. And if you don't have these, you can use a foam brush, works really good as well. But these little markers work great and refillable and very accurate for running that edge. Just want to make sure we get a nice, smooth, even line on there. Way down. We'll go all the way around with this. Now that's set with that dye, I'm going to come back with gum tragacanth or any kind of slicking solution that you want. There's lots of good ones out there. We're going to come by and put that gum trag right along that edge, same one we just dyed. Make sure you get good coverage on there, but not slopping over your edges. And after we do that, with a scrap of canvas, I'm going to come along and slick that up as well. So a little bit of pressure, a little bit of elbow grease. That friction on there is going to help run that gum trag in there, seal up that edge. And what we're after is getting that nice slicked off glass feel to that. And you run your finger down that, it should be nice and smooth and feel like a really nice finished product. All right, so we'll work our way around, get all these sides slicked up, and then it'll be time to put this cap down onto the, or put this cover onto the cap. And now that we're all slicked up, it's time to get this stuck down here so we can go to stitch that on. Now, if you want to, you can contact cement that and not worry about stitching. If maybe you don't have a machine or don't want to hand stitch, that could work too and you'd be fine. But we're gonna go ahead and actually stitch this down. But I'm just worried about holding it in place until I can stitch that. This isn't something that gets a ton of wear and tear. So I'm gonna use this double-sided sticky tape. We're gonna come down just on the edge of that, get this put in place. Roll all the way around here. When I put this on, I make sure that I'm just inside that edge. I don't want any of that sticky stuff sticking outside of that edge, being exposed once we stitch that down. Now that that's stuck there, we need to go through and take the paper off of that. I like using this little scratch awl. It makes it easy to get a hold of that paper without trying to peel up the whole sticky piece that needs to stay on there. All right, the garbage part out of the way. Now, I go to put this on. Let's double check on our cap here. Most of them are going to tell you front of cap or back of cap, because we would hate to put this on here and not have it the right direction, right? You don't want that year kicked off to the side. We want that right here in the front, the way we have this tooled up. So I know these tassels actually like come undone there, but easy enough just to pop this one through here. So we're going to pop that through, make sure we're lined up center around the center knob there, a little button area. And we'll push this down Make sure that sticks down good all the way around our edges. Now we can take this over to the sewing machine. We're going to stitch down right through the cap, which is just cardboard in there, so that's going to stitch through really nice and easy. Before you go stitch yours up, I got to show you what happened to me so you can either do this on purpose or choose not to do this. But you see this really cool looking kind of rope edge to that where it's got the twist in there? Yeah, that was not on purpose. Okay, see how the back of this fabric here kind of pulled with my machine a little bit, so it kind of created this little twist around here. So if you're after that look, hey, great, rock on and just sew fast. But if you don't want that and you want it more clean, like I got down here at the back side of that, then make sure when you stitch that, you keep the back of that fabric pulled nice and tight and solid so it can't pull up like that on you. So watch for that as you go to stitch this. If you're stitching by hand, not an issue. All right, there we have it, finished grad cap project there. I think that turned out pretty darn cool. So I hope you guys have fun with this. Remember, this is part of a series, so if you want to go back, catch the previous episode where we tooled up this entire pattern, feel free to do that. It should be the first one or the one right ahead of this in the playlist. Also, if you want the pattern to be able to tool this yourself, then be sure to jump into the Leather Life community. The link for that's down below. And you can find this pattern along with patterns for our other projects that we've done there as well. So thank you for allowing me to be part of your Leathercraft journey, and look forward to seeing you on the next video.